Hello. My name's Sam Underwood. I maybe should have said that a minute ago. And Soundings for me is an opportunity to present my work to an audience on a rolling basis. And normally the work that I present is very explicitly mechanical in the same way that, say, Pierre's work is, or the two projects I presented before are. On this occasion, it's a different kind of mechanical musical instrument in a way. I've got a series of feedback instruments that I want to show you. I don't really get to choose, often I don't get to choose which bits of my work take off. Like sometimes I find this seam of inspiration and I might work on something flat out for 3 months and then make a handful of instruments out the back end of that, and then maybe they never see the light of day, or maybe they do. And feedback instruments alongside my other more explicitly mechanical instruments is an area that I've been working on and off for a long time. I'm going to try and, well, let's have a little experiment first. I'll see how this goes. On the count of 3, could you all make the noise that is in your mind's ear, if that's a thing, when I say to you feedback? Okay, are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Excellent. Well done. That's what I was anticipating, and there's a really interesting point there, I think, which is that feedback, generally speaking, is something that we don't want, and it's something that's very squealy and horrible and hurts our ears. Well, this is based on a much larger instrument that I made some years ago, and this is part of my acoustic modular system. And this is a feedback pipe that has a pitch that's derived in the same way as an organ pipe derives its pitch from the length of this pipe. So it has a microphone here and a speaker here, and instead of going ee, it goes ooh. And if I put an extra bit of pipe on the end, it makes a lower note, and if I shorten the pipe, it makes a higher note. But the only thing that's happening in there is microphone plus gain, and then back into the speaker, and that's enough to create a different tone. And the large version of this instrument that myself and my colleague David made some years ago was really, really large. It had a 4-meter long largest pipe and created a tone I can't even start to replicate with my voice, which was F0, so considerably lower probably than anything even that large organ there can make. So that's the first point, really, is that feedback doesn't have to be a squealy thing. It can be pitched in various ways through the resonant environment that it finds, that the microphone and the speaker find themselves in. That will determine what pitch you get as a feedback instrument. So I harness that in a variety of ways. I'm going to quickly show you what's underneath this thing. This is one of the main feedback instruments and instrument systems that I've been working on. This is just a surface, really, a metal surface. This is actually the bottom of a wah-wah pedal. It has a contact mic here, which picks up the vibrations of this sheet, and then it has a driver, which just is rather like what you get in a speaker cabinet, but instead of driving a speaker cone, it's driving power back into this plate. And that's enough when you turn it on, which I was meant to do, but actually I've got to go all the way around there to turn it on, so maybe you'll see it later on. That's enough to make this make a sort of mid-tone squeal. And then the way in which this becomes an exciting system mechanically, I think I am going to have to go and turn it on, so just bear with me a sec. Lots of kit to walk around. Right, if I just turn, we need that in there, and that in there. If I turn this on, makes a tone. That tone is coming from the way in which these various elements are coupled to the sheet. And it's very responsive to adaptations in that coupling. So I'll give it a little bit more gain. So just by pressing on the sheet, you can change the pitch of that. If you then, for example, take this funny floppy thing, which has a magnet on one end, and you pluck it so that it vibrates, that's enough to alter the coupling of all of that system to alter the pitch and modulate it. And if you use more mass, you get a greater variation in the pitches that it creates. And it can go on for quite a while. And so that's the way that a lot of my feedback instruments try and harness the mechanical, structural, physical aspects of a material to create various different tones. I like them in particular really because they still have the inherent gnarliness of the feedback that we all hear in our heads. And they are a bit prone to, I mean, there's no overriding control that I have really on what pitches this might output. So it could play nicely and it might make pitches that fit well with the tune that I'm making, but it could also go off on one, and I embrace that as ever. I've subsequently gone on to, and I don't know if you will be able to see this, but this is going to be sort of a main instrument in the performance later. I've subsequently gone on to take this zither and thinking about what I've mentioned about the resonances of a physical system and the material properties of this, I decided to build, which is on there, a very, very long guitar pickup. It's about that long, and it means that all of the strings on the zither are picked up at the same time. And then you have almost a spectral feedback system. So according to, even dare I say, the way it's placed on top of this cushion, certain frequencies will come to the fore, and then of course they're tunable strings as well. So you can get this very dense and varied frequency response that's adaptable, and simply using things, I mean, it can be a physical change that you make to it, or simply using things like the EQ on a desk, which is what I'll be doing later. It just brings certain frequencies up to the fore and others disappear. And that's how that system runs. Lastly, and very briefly, there's a gong behind me, which is a system that I built for a different band that I'm in. I'm in a kind of doom brass duo, and we play long form brass stuff through 2 activated gongs. And they are really just speakers, but the cone of the speaker is this weirdly shimmering and highly resonant cone, essentially. So and I've even taken that to the nth degree by, if you think of this as the kind of the bass driver, then this is your mid-range and this is your tweeter. And essentially you end up with this really quite unruly speaker system that is quite powerful. And in the case of the brass stuff that we do, sometimes it really kicks off and it sort of like adds a whole layer of kind of shimmery sound to the top of it. I'll be using it in the set later, not as a feedback instrument in this case, but just to take all of those feedback frequencies and add kind of layers of metallic shimmer to the piece. That's me on feedback instruments. Does anybody have any questions?
What's your favourite feedback sound of an instrument or piece that you made? What's the thing that you like the most?
I did. It was a real challenge making the giant feedback organ, which was originally commissioned by the South Bank Centre, and we were given a handful of notes that we had to create. And it was just 3 notes, but they were all right down at the bottom end. Because it was one of 4 instruments that played in ensemble together, and other people were in charge of the notes higher up the frequency. That was most pleasing when it worked. It also made a very powerful noise. I mean, they had to turn it off when there were things going on in the Royal Festival Hall because the seats would rattle. So, you know, it was a pleasing thing to have achieved. And you would get, with an instrument of that scale, you get lots of standing waves going off around the space as well. So there was one right by the door where people came in. If people were playing our instrument, then it was very obvious in a couple of spaces just around the room where the standing waves were just kicking off. So yeah, that was good. Yes? I'm meant to repeat the question, I remember now. Do I make all of these at home or do I go somewhere else to make them, is the question. I'm lucky enough to have quite a large workshop and studio in Callow End. So mostly I make them at home. The giant feedback organ was a slightly strange case because what we found at some point in building that instrument was that it was not able to create the lowest note that we needed to create in the room that it was in, because the room has what's called a room mode, which was restricting what we could create as a low note. So we actually had to take it out in the garden, and the rest of the development of the giant feedback organ was done in a tent in the garden, basically a marquee, which I had in the garden for ages. So yeah. Essentially at mine, but sometimes outside. Yes?
When you're doing the feedback, what's that like? Is the hardest thing getting the feedback to work, or the hardest thing to stop it sort of going away and self-destructing?
To be honest with you, it definitely still always does have that potential. And in a couple of times when I've been preparing for this, it does go off on one. There's a lot of it when you're building them in this physical way rather than almost an equivalent of an air, so the organ pipe ones, they will really go off higher than you want them to, and a lot of the time you just use a filter to chop the top off. So in those cases, it's quite hard to get it to do what you want it to do. In the case of the physical ones where you're driving into a material, so much of the note that you're getting is just the physicality of it, that it tends not to go totally wild.